Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Pelonis. And now, Dr. Peggy Pelonis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today we have a very special guest, David Michaels, and I'm so excited to hear his story and unravel parts of his leadership thread. David, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Peggy.
You know, I really don't know where to start because there's so much to say here, but just a very, very short introduction.
From the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'll do it justice. So, global strategic advisor and mentor with over 40 years of experience counseling heads of state, chairmen, presidents, and CEOs of international organizations. You served as a consultant to major corporations, governments, and political leaders on business, economics, and political restructuring, strategic problem solving, and financial negotiations. I can go on and on. You're an active commentator and writer on strategic business, finance, trade, and international debt and economic development. You've represented some of the major global brands in communication, defense, security, and financial sectors. Advisor to law enforcement and legal professionals on issues like fraud, corruption, and illegal international transactions. But you're also very deeply involved in philanthropy, civic leadership, and not to mention an author. So where would you like to start to unravel this thread that led you to where you are today?
Well, when we had our earlier discussions about the subject matter, and I was reluctant to discuss leadership, I was very interested in your desire to delve into what makes or what creates leadership qualities.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I don't consider myself a leader. Particularly in today's world, where many people, both in the public and private sectors, are considered leaders. I frankly don't consider them leaders. They might be in leadership roles, but they're not leaders. So let's go back to the beginning. What turned me into what I am today and what I might be tomorrow? It all starts at home.
Yeah.
The culture you're born into, the conditioning you have. So that was very important to me. I'm one of 4 children. I have 2 sisters and a brother.
And you are where in that line of...
It was girl, boy, girl, boy. Good arrangement, I think.
And your number?
I'm number 2. I have an older sister, logically, and then a younger sister and a younger brother. And it was a happy household. Disciplined. There were rules and regulations. I was born just after the end of the Second World War. Things were not easy in England with rationing, and my father... I didn't see much of my father in my very early years because he was in the military, and then when he got out of the military, he had a big decision to make of whether to go into his family business or stay in the South Coast in Portsmouth, where I was born, and do something else. While I knew later, of course, that my father had no interest in being a stockbroker. So he stayed down, and the fact that you talk about leadership thread, my grandfather on my mother's side was a bespoke tailor, plus he was a property dealer, a property owner and such like. So my father thought he would use his military benefits and go and learn to be a bespoke tailor, which was quite a lengthy process. So I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, who was a wise old owl and a character. So I think he started the ball rolling for me about values and ethics and morals.
Of course, you didn't know at the time that he was so wise, because you're thinking of that now, later in your life, right? Looking back, that he was a wise person. But he was, you said, an interesting character. So what made him, because that kept your attention, what made him interesting?
He was funny. He was entertaining. I learned later that he was a bit of a, we would say in England, a bit of a lad in his youth with the ladies and such like. He was a character.
Yeah.
And very interesting. When he was trying to teach me something, it was easy to absorb because it wasn't with, and you should do this, you should do that. He would tell a story connected and finish the story with a wise quote, perhaps.
Something that you could look towards.
I still remember some of them.
Oh.
The one that I have never forgotten is that the good Lord gave you 2 eyes, 2 ears, and only 1 mouth. And therefore you should look and listen at least 4 times more than you speak. And then he would add to that, because you never learn anything while you're speaking, which is what I'm going to stop now and hand it back to you.
Wow. Okay, well, that's an interesting lesson. So in your career span, what would you say were some of the thematic highlights of some of the things that you worked on that gave you, that you were passionate about or that you were interested in pursuing?
Well, if I may go back a little bit further, because you were originally asking the question, what components, what environment, what happened in my formative years that led me down this path. Right. When I was a youngster, I had a tremendous interest in mathematics, physics, and my father, when I got back from school, when my father was then back at home, we had a system in England called pounds, shillings, and pence, which was a very complicated currency. There were 12 pence to a shilling and 20 shillings to a pound. And when you were doing these practical homework with pounds, shillings, and pence, my father would show me mental exercises to do these things very quickly. And he kept on. He would ask me, what's a dozen apples at 2 pence? Things like this, which eventually I believe it really started, shall we say, conditioning my brain and how it functioned. So maths, I was very, very happy with. At school later, now we didn't have the name nerd when I was at school, but I probably would be called a nerd today. I used to look forward to algebra. Imagine, most people didn't want to know about algebra, but algebra to me was problem solving. Yeah. So I knew I had, my brain was already geared towards problem solving. I enjoyed the challenge. So then we move on, and there's some jumps, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do, whether I was going to be a career military officer or go into one of the professions. I wasn't sure. So unfortunately, I could not go into the military for a health reason at that stage. I got a benefit of some very good training during that time, because in my school we had what would be known as in the United States as OTC, I think, officer.
Mm-hmm. ROTC, yeah.
That was the way in for somebody like me to get into Sandhurst, for example. And then I studied chartered accountancy, which in England you would consider, it was before an MBA, but it was an MBA before an MBA, because it wasn't just ticking books or doing bookkeeping. It was both corporate law, common law, economics, taxation. It was a really rounded business degree. And when I was doing that, I found by an accident that I was very good at solving problems in the financial area. And one thing led to another. And then I found myself solving problems on an international basis.
And that's what you do. Yeah, that's one of the highlights I read about, that you have this ability to synthesize information, break it down, and figure out solutions, and convey that process or that ability to others, especially on large scales, which is really what we want to teach young people to be able to do, to problem solve and figure out ways to go around, find those solutions rather than be victim of circumstances most of the time.
And one area of being a victim of circumstance in today's world, I remember in my formative years, an emphasis on critical thinking.
Yeah.
That is not just to accept what your professors, what your teachers will say. Think it through. Ask why, where, when. I was looking through some of my archives material, and I found an old school report. To read it, you would think, no, they're talking about two distinctly different individuals. Some teachers would say, brilliant student, interested leader in the class, because these are the classes that I was right at the top in, or first or second in the subjects, mostly mathematics, physics, economics, and what. And others would say, David Michaels is disruptive. Why was I disruptive? Because I would ask them questions. I would not accept what they said just because they're a teacher. Explain to me. So I was known as a disruptive even at that tender age.
And that's what you suggest in one of the articles that I read about the United Nations, and the way that system works, and in many ways has become complacent. You suggest that disruption is what's necessary.
Well, that's the United Nations situation, and that could be a discussion for hours.
Could be anyone, yeah. It could be anything.
On another subject. But I'm going back to what I'm saying. If you want to start creating real leaders with ethics and morals, then you have to have a basic education of asking questions, not just accepting things. Go back, back into the education system, critical thinking, getting people to think, not relying on this, because today, I tell many people, garbage in, garbage out. And I have a little experience in misinformation, disinformation and propaganda. That's what they're trying to feed the generations now and to come. They don't want you asking questions. You have a question, ask Google. That's not the way to create leaders. You create leaders because they're thinking people, they're moral people.
For you, though, a large part of that was shaped by that ability to do, algebraic problems or different kinds of. How much do they?
No, I want to go back. A lot of that was around the fact of the ethics and morals and values that I was brought up with in my family, and to a certain extent, at school. At school, when I went to school, they were teaching geography, history, all the mathematics, all the essential stuff. Not asking some kid who is not even old enough to put on a cell phone and ask them to question their own sexuality and such like. What about history? Learn history. You'll learn a lot from history. So I would say it's back to basics. Family life and early schooling. Think. Don't just accept.
And how much do the humanities play a part in all that, teaching that critical thinking skill?
Well, first of all, you have to change the system. And there are those in control of education who have no interest in letting people think for themselves. It's an uphill battle. I have met teachers and professors say, we're not allowed to bring that into our subject. We have to discuss this, we have to discuss that. So you have to go back to basics. If the education system won't do it, then it has to start at home to teach ethics, values, morals, and such like. But on the leadership side, because we went off a little bit off subject, on the leadership side, I really couldn't tell you why I'm different to anybody else, except problems. For me, I was delighted to have problems because I didn't consider it a headache. I considered it a challenge. So every time I've been brought in on sometimes some very difficult situations, I've smiled. Another challenge. Remember that one person's problem is another person's solution in many times. The question is to find it, or at least is somebody's challenge. And if you're excited about a subject, normally you can succeed. And moving on to leadership, in my experience, my approach to solving problems of, should we say, some of them quite sizable, was to bring and guide and suggest others to make the changes and solve their own problems. So really, a leader, no, I think more a guide, a mentor. I think that's possibly true leadership. You can have a title, doesn't make you a leader. I've always preferred to be, in powerful situations, I've always preferred to be the power behind. Far more interesting to me, less exposure for me, and far more enjoyable. And if I'm right, somebody else can take the credit. Doesn't bother me.
Doesn't matter to you.
And if I'm wrong, well, the person who I'm just joking now.
But you going back to that, the values that you mentioned that are so important, and I completely agree with you in growing up with certain values. What were some of the values that were instilled in early childhood? What do you remember?
That if something good happens to you, you should share it. Don't look down at people because this was instilled at a very young age, because they're a different color, different religion. Everybody is a human being. So this human being is instilled at a young age. And I had friends from all religions and all cultures. And that, I think, broadens someone's mind as well, because you can learn from other cultures. There are some countries that consider their culture number one and want to push it on the rest of the world, which is very disrespectful, because there are cultures older than possibly your own that have, shall we say, created values of other types and given to the world a lot of credible information and knowledge. But there are tendencies for people to forget that and think their way is the only way. Yeah. And that's another way that's not leadership.
And that's what gets us into trouble. Because if my way is the only way, then I want to impose it and I want to be right. And you're saying it's not about being right. It's
about being
sharing.
Correct.
That's right. It's about collaborating. It's about, sharing your story so that others can also shine in the process.
And giving back.
Tell me a little bit about the philanthropy that you're involved in.
Philanthropy, what is basically giving your assets, the most valuable one, of course, is your time. Yeah. And if you can afford it, some money to help and develop lesser individuals or organizations. So most of the time, I've given my time. Where?
And your skill, of course.
Where?
Yeah.
And for who? I don't talk very much about who I've benefited and such like. Some are because of publicly known. I did some work a few years ago in the Foreign Press Association of the United States, which needed some assistance. Well, that's publicly known. Yeah. But there are also some organizations, not just in this country or in England, but other parts of the world that I've given my time and some of my money to. And I don't do it for recognition. I do it because that's the way I was brought up.
And I strongly believe, and if we can teach this to young children and they can understand that by giving, by helping to improve somebody else's life or life on the planet, it also gives us an internal satisfaction that really develops psychological muscle strength.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
So here's a value that you just conveyed to me that I'd like to share, this part of your life, and that is humility. And I think that's a very important part of leadership, though it's not always, displayed that way. But I believe it sounds like humility was a very, very strong part of who you are and who you have become.
And also my very dark sense of humor. I use humor in problem solving. I've given speeches on very serious subjects, but I always include humor in that, because most people have, I'm being very generous, most people have an attention span of about 2 minutes. So you need, within the 2 minutes, to either say something entertaining or do something shocking to keep their attention. So a sense of humor is very important, particularly in problem solving.
Yeah.
Because in many times you're brought in and everybody has their defenses up.
Yeah.
That's no way to create a solution.
Because it can be very intimidating. Yeah.
I remember one particular difficult international situation where the defenses were really up. And I spent a week or more there just getting to know the people who were key to the solution. And in the end, you would have thought we were the best lifelong friends. And we got the job done, not because I told them what to do, I made suggestions to them because they were the ones that had to solve the problem.
You brought out their creative power as well.
Exactly, without having this defensive mechanism which blocked their creative thinking.
I agree. I know that we can go on for 100 other episodes talking, and that still wouldn't be enough, but I really thank you for being with us today and sharing a piece of your thread, leadership thread. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in once again to another episode of The Leadership Thread and listening to our stories.